This morning I'm going to do the short version of ZEV. We do offer a all-day seminar tutorial which needs to be updated since our latest amendments to the regulation, but the important thing is it's getting simpler. I'll start with why California gets out in front of the nation with motor vehicle regulations. 90% of Californians are breathing unhealthy levels of pollutants at times throughout the year in California. It's having significant impact on the health of children and susceptible adults with breathing issues. And so we're on a path to reaching health-based air quality standards as required by the federal government. We have the worst air quality in the nation, specifically in Los Angeles, but even as you can see from the chart, the ozone chart on the state of California map there, it runs all the way up into the Central Valley. We're also taking on the challenge of trying to meet greenhouse gas emission reductions from motor vehicles. In the state, we've committed to reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. When we sat back and took a look at what it would take to get there from passenger vehicles alone, modeling a scenario where we actually meet an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from passenger cars and light trucks, we need to see zero-emission technologies such as hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, battery electrics, plug-in hybrids, really dominating the market, and that needs to start in the near term, really sort of 2030. We need to have a significant presence in the marketplace of those technologies. So this is another reason that we've continued to be committed to making the zero-emission vehicle regulation work and, in fact, accelerate its implementation in the coming years. How do ZEVs fit into our strategy to meet the criteria pollutant and greenhouse gas emission reductions? Why can't conventional vehicles do this? These two charts compare conventional technologies, which are getting cleaner. They've done remarkable things on both a greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant basis. We do see a significant drop in emissions from today's gasoline vehicles to the gasoline vehicles we expect to see in 2020 and in 2025. But it's not until we get to the electric drive technologies, plug-in hybrids, electrics, and fuel cells, that we see significant drop. And this is on a well-to-wheel basis. So these are the areas we need to focus on to meet the health-based air quality standards and our GHG emission reduction targets. So here's what the ZEV regulation, in a nutshell, requires. It requires manufacturers to produce a number of zero-emission vehicles and plug-in hybrids that earn them credits equal to a percentage of their production each year. So the percentages increase over time. They're sort of flat at the moment in this phase from 2015 to 2017. And in that period, they still include conventional hybrids and extremely clean, what we call partial zero-emission vehicles. But in 2018, the percentages start to ramp up considerably, and we drop out the conventional hybrids and the PZEVs because those are really commercial, and we're really depending on those as part of the compliance strategy for the low-emission vehicle regulation. They become part of the performance standard that covers the fleet as a whole. And we really concentrate on the plug-in hybrids and the battery electrics and fuel cells. So you can see in this regulation, or sorry, in this slide that the old regulation sort of plotted along with the dashed lines, and the new regulation ramps up considerably. The way it works is a manufacturer has a certain percentage of credits that they have to come up with, a certain percentage of their production. They can meet that with a mix of vehicles, but a certain number of those credits have to come from pure zero-emission vehicles, like battery electrics and fuel cells. The rest can be met with plug-in hybrids. So this is our best guess of the mix of vehicles that we'll get and the number that we will have in the 2025 timeframe, 15.4% of new car sales. But it's not an absolute. We may have manufacturers that focus solely on battery electrics and meet their entire regulation obligation that way, and others which maximize the amount of credits that can be used from plug-in hybrids. And from there, it gets more complicated with how much credit each vehicle earns. The more range a vehicle has, the more credit it earns. So this is a projection using averages and assumptions about how manufacturers will comply. So Alan mentioned that when we started implementation of the regulation in the early 2000s, it was not met with tremendous success, nor did we have a great deal of product or sales. As we went into the amendments this last year, things have changed rather dramatically. We're now at a point where there are many models coming to market. The resistance from the automakers was not significant. It was around the edges. It was in the details that manufacturers complained at our board hearing, but for the most part, there was an acceptance that this future is going to happen. It's not just happening in California, it's happening worldwide, and with product announcements similar, like those that are listed in this slide, it's very hard to suggest that these technologies are not coming to commercial levels. So I would say that the fundamental argument that we heard before the board, if there was anything sort of big picture, it was, yes, ZEVs is here, ZEVs are here, we can have a zero-emission vehicle regulation. The real issue is whether we're going too fast. Is 15.4% of new car sales by 2025 too fast? And so that's going to be the real issue. It's not a question of is the technology ready to come to market, it's a question of whether the consumer is ready to accept the technology. Because I'm going to keep my remarks short on the whole, I'd like to make sure that I leave some time to talk about what California is doing to support zero-emission vehicles beyond telling car companies you have to do this. We've also, our governor is very supportive of the zero-emission vehicle regulation, has adopted a executive order, B16-2012, which calls for 1.5 million ZEVs on California roads by 2025, enough infrastructure to support 1 million ZEVs by 2020, that the state itself shall put its money where its mouth is and start buying ZEVs for its fleet, 10% by 2015 and 25% by 2020. That we will focus on growing jobs and investment in zero-emission technologies within the state, and that there will be a focus on seeing heavy-duty and transit applications for zero-emission technology as well. We also have a clean vehicle rebate program. We had that back in the early 2000s as well. Now we're offering $2,500 for the purchase of a zero-emission vehicle and $1,500 for a plug-in hybrid. That's in addition to federal tax credits of $7,500 for ZEVs. So that's helping the market. We're also spending a great deal of the state's money on infrastructure development, both plug-in and hydrogen, through the California Energy Commission's Assembly Bill 118 funding. We have 2.5 more years of funding for that, and that has put in hundreds of public and private and workplace chargers, and is funding a couple dozen hydrogen stations. We're also heavily involved in a couple of public-private partnerships that are very much trying to remove barriers to commercialization of zero-emission vehicles. The Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative and the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Both of these are made up of car companies, energy providers, government agencies, and all focused on consumer awareness, making communities ready to accept this new fuel and new vehicle marketplace, as well as helping with infrastructure planning, where should infrastructure go for the public, and so forth. I forgot to mention on the infrastructure development. In addition to our funding of stations and through grants, we've also adopted a regulation, the Clean Fuels Outlet, which actually, let me rephrase that. We didn't just adopt it. We had it on the books from 1990. Back in 1990, we recognized that if we were going to commercialize alternative fuels, we needed to make sure that the infrastructure was there to support them. So it said that once a certain number of vehicles was forecasted to come to the market that were using an alternative fuel, fuel providers were required to put in stations to support those vehicles. We amended that regulation in January along with the amendments to the zero emission vehicle regulation, and focused it on hydrogen. That's the fuel of concern at the moment. And we're in the process of finalizing that regulation with our Office of Administrative Law, and that should be finished in December. I'll close with what success looks like for the zero emission vehicle regulation. We're looking to make zero emission vehicles commercial such that when we go back to update the low emission vehicle regulation again, we can start using them as the basis for the fleet average standards for emissions. So we would be relying on the fact that zero emission vehicles are in the marketplace, and we can ratchet down the low emission vehicle criteria pollutant standards even farther, more towards zero. And the greenhouse gas emission regulations are further driving towards zero. And as I showed, we really need these to happen in order to meet health-based air quality standards and greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And I put a picture of my son, he's a little older now, here, because it's a reminder that while it's cool for us to drive these cars and we're thinking about whether or not we could make it work for us, it is very much about what they're going to be driving when they get their driver's licenses, and what they're going to be breathing and what they're going to be dealing with in terms of climate. And we have to be starting today in order to make that happen. So thank you.